Welcome in everybody to the Bare Knuckle Recovery Podcast. I am Tommy Streeter. This is Nate Moellering. This is episode 34. As you guys can see, we've got a guest with us today. This is Warren Gumpel. And Warren is an advocate in the ketamine space. He is a filmmaker. He is a consultant. He started a nonprofit. He's basically done a whole lot of stuff in this space. And so I'm going to let you go ahead and get started and tell everybody just a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the things that you have done, some of the things that you're working on in the future, and we'll just kind of see where this conversation goes.
Yeah. So, I'm been somebody that dealt with a lot of depression and anxiety and substance use issues my entire life. I'd have these periods of like productivity, and I always got inspired by things that I thought were really interesting. Like I worked on Wall Street, and then I worked in the music business and all of these things. But like this through line in my life has been that I just have this depression that takes over. And, when it comes, I never really knew what to do about it. So, about 13 years ago, I had an event in my life where I lost one of my best friends from growing up, and I was already in this kind of negative space, and it just threw me into a depression that I couldn't get out of. And I was still going to the psychiatrist and still changing all my meds. And like, the cycle is like you take a new medicine and you wait 6 weeks, and you see if it works and what side effects you're going to have. It started feeling really hopeless. Like I was a couple of years into it, switching my meds all the time, dealing with all these side effects. I'm like, this isn't going to work. Like I have to start thinking about like how to make this pain go away. And it's a terrible place to be in. And luckily I found something about ketamine treatments. I was living in New York City at the time. There was a doctor a couple of blocks from where I was living who was doing treatments. And I was willing to try anything. I didn't want to, the thought of ending it sounded very peaceful to me, but the destruction of what it would do to my family was the thing that allowed me to hold on to things and keep looking for solutions. So for me to find ketamine, I'm like, I'll try anything. So I went down the street. This doctor, by the way, it's interesting to know that the doctor that treated me was renting a single room in a podiatrist's office. Now that doctor has 4 clinics. That same office has 15 treatment rooms, and it takes months to get in to see him. But when I went in, it was like, no frills, get up there, get the ketamine IV and you're out of there. And I had no expectations. Like I read may cause dizziness, just didn't know what to expect. But after a couple of treatments, my depression, my suicidal thoughts, and my anxiety were just gone.
And that was how long ago?
That's about 10 years ago.
Okay.
And talk a little bit about, because some people are saying, wow, I should go get some ketamine and my depression's going to go away. But talk about some of the behavioral changes that you made, because I know you've talked about that in the past, how that is like an integral part of the therapy, that you don't just go get some ketamine pills offline and start eating them and think your life's going to magically turn into like a better world, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I first got the ketamine, I think the theory of the doctors was you get the medicine and that's going to take care of things. What I've learned over this last 10 years of exploring the space and trying to educate myself is that the ketamine is not a silver bullet that makes your depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts go away. It can give you space, and it's a catalyst to make changes. The most important part of ketamine treatment is the changes that you make during that space. When you're in this window of heightened neuroplasticity, and you have the ability to have some distance from your depression and start implementing changes in your daily practices. That's what I focus on when I'm helping people get through the treatment. I say, whatever happens in that 1 hour window of the ketamine, it can be very interesting because it is this, dissociative psychedelic, and people have unique experiences. But the important part is you are in a state of neuroplasticity, and you have the ability to change your underlying thought patterns, the actual architecture of your brain, which is amazing. 20 years ago, if you had depression or addiction, they would say you're Warren and you're depressed, and that's going to be with you forever. Now, how do you manage that? Now, understanding neuroplasticity, we know you can change how your brain's thought patterns, and something like ketamine turbocharges that neuroplasticity. It helps build new neurons, which, just maps to building new thought patterns. And that's the important part about it. What do you do in that heightened state of neuroplasticity?
That's amazing. Yeah. So talk a little bit more about that, if you would, the neuroplasticity, and kind of also maybe like, what is the experience like? 'Cause I think a lot of people, the pushback we always get is people say, oh, you guys are giving you're getting somebody high to get them through. And it's like, that's not what it is though. Talk about how it kind of is a disassociative and what that means and why that's so important to let people explore the parts of their brain and maybe their trauma in a way that doesn't re-traumatize.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's so important. So what happens within that 45 minutes of the treatment? Well, first, it's a dissociative anesthetic. It's a super safe drug. It's been FDA approved since 1970 as a, and is the most widely used human anesthetic and on the World Health Organization's list of essential medications. So first and foremost, it's safe. Second, what's going on in that sub-anesthetic dissociative dose that we aim for to treat mood disorders and things like that is, I'll use common language as to how people describe it, but it shuts off what they call the default mode network of your brain, which is where your inner narrative lies, your ego. Basically, I'm Warren and I'm this and that. And you begin to see your life through a very narrow window, especially if you're in the throes of addiction or deep mental health issues. Like all you can see is your addiction and your depression, and you can't see outside of that. So, the ketamine and the dissociation allows you to pull back and see your life from a very different perspective. It kind of opens that tunnel vision, and you can see yourself and be like, I'm not just that. I'm all of these other things. I'm trapped in this thought pattern, but I've been this other person throughout my life. I have these other thoughts, these other desires, and these other passions, and just a minute of a break from that, that incessant dialogue can give you, a moment to reflect and say, all right, I can make some changes. That's one part of what the experience is like. Another part is it seems to allow you to comb through your memory bank and allow you to revisit some of your core and formative memories. And oftentimes those memories, especially, some traumatic memories that we might have had, during our emotional development, are manifesting into depression and anxiety and self-medication in our adulthood. So to give you guys an example, like within the Ketamine Fund, which is a 501c3 that I started for veterans specifically, the veterans, and we all know, we hear about PTSD and veterans coming back and having a lot of trouble reintegrating into society. Oftentimes what's happening is they have these, memories that, they can recall at any time. It's causing a physiological response in the present to recall a memory of a trauma that might have happened, while they were serving. And, now they're in Walmart thinking about this memory, and their body is reliving the memory as if they're on a battlefield.
Fight or flight, right?
Yeah. Putting them right into their sympathetic fight or flight nervous system. That starts your heart rate increasing, the release of adrenaline, and the end of that domino effect can be substance abuse. It can be suicide.
Yeah.
It can be, benzodiazepines. It could be all of these things that, are not optimal for living life. So anyways, with the ketamine, the fact that it's kind of combing through that memory bank, for some reason, it stops at the places that seem to have the most effect. This isn't for everybody, but, if you asked 100 people, what was your experience like? 85 of them would say, I've revisited this memory that I didn't realize was so impactful. But because it's a dissociative, it gives you some physiological distance from the memory. So, people will describe it in many different ways. I describe it as kind of like standing in the doorway and watching some of these memories unfold in front of you. But instead of feeling like physiologically attached, like, oh, that's me and I'm re-experiencing the memory, you get some distance, kind of like you're watching it play out in front of you. And that distance oftentimes allows people to re-examine and recontextualize the memory, and you take off that physiological trigger in the present. When thinking about the memory is not triggering all of your defense mechanisms and pulling you far away from it, you at times have the opportunity to reanalyze it and take off the electricity off of that memory. So when you recall it when you're in Walmart with your family, it's no longer causing a panic attack or whatever the PTSD response that you're manifesting.
It kind of reminds me a lot of like EMDR therapy.
That's what I was just thinking also.
Are you familiar with EMDR?
Yeah, I am. And it's the same underlying notion. It's how do you recontextualize these memories so they're no longer manifesting into things like depression and substance abuse. You're taking, you're trying to, you don't erase the memory. The memory always exists, but you erase the impact of the memory on the present.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, EMDR is a therapy. It's a rapid eye movement therapy. So they kind of talk you through some of your traumatic experiences. But like Warren said, they're very intentional about saying, don't put yourself in the memory. Watch it like on a TV screen, like you're at a movie, or that like it's a train car's passing you by, or you're standing in the doorway. And then what it's doing is when your eyes move back and forth, it's connecting the left and right side of your brain and helping you process. It's very similar to, that's why REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, is so important, is because that's how it processes it. But a lot of times people with PTSD and trauma, they don't sleep well. Right? Because when they go to sleep, they have these bad memories. They don't realize it's their brain trying to reprocess them, reorganize them, and work through them. So it's very similar. So is that something sometimes that, because I know a lot of people have trouble getting into EMDR and allowing themselves to kind of relax and get in that space. Is this something sometimes that it works well, like there's synergy between the two, where perhaps like you go to try EMDR, doesn't work for you because it's just too much, and then you do the ketamine, and then it opens the door for maybe some extra work down the road like that?
Yeah, there are actually protocols emerging of EMDR concurrently with ketamine through the treatment for that exact reason, to allow people's, brains open up to allow for neuroplasticity. There's not a ton of data on that, but it's exciting and interesting, of course. And then I think, in some of the places that I've helped implement ketamine treatments, we do EMDR and ketamine, not concurrently, but on different days. And I think, some of the space that the ketamine, gives you, they work very synergistically, and for the reasons you explained. I mean, they're both aiming to do the same thing.
So I guess, does it also help with if somebody is on a prescription for, depression or anything like that? You're talking about it opening these doors and increasing neuroplasticity in the brain. Does it also help other medications like that work a little bit better for people?
The problem with when you stack these medications is it's so hard to decipher the independent variables. So like, if the ketamine is working, it might, if you discounted the ketamine, it might look like some of the SSRIs are working. So when these variables stack, it's kind of hard to pull them apart. But I would say, for me, from my perspective, at the end of the day, it's how do we get people out of a state of depression and suicidality and substance abuse? So the ketamine does work concurrently with those SSRIs. Whether it's making the SSRI work better, I don't know, but oftentimes people are able to get to a place in their life where not only is life manageable, but they can experience joy and experience fulfillment in their life when they're both taking an SSRI and, going through ketamine treatments.
And I assume it's very important then for doctors to talk and, like for people to have connections between their doctors when they're doing ketamine therapy, because one may be prescribing psychotropic medication, the other might be doing the ketamine treatment with them. It's probably important for them to have communication between each other, right?
Sure. I think for for doctors in the psychiatric space, I think understanding the full context, the biopsychosocial history of the patients is critical. One thing that I think is important and where I've spent a lot of time focusing in the last couple of years is implementing ketamine into inpatient facilities like Allendale and some other cutting edge facilities across this country that, basically have recognized that, if you go in for depression now in 2025, you're going to get the same medication that you would have got in 1987.
Which is crazy to think about with all the other advances we've made technologically and all these other things, right? It's like we're still using the same medications.
It's shocking. I mean, it's really shocking. Like, we didn't have cell phones in our pockets in 1987. Now we have all of the knowledge of all of the world in our pocket. Look at a car from 1987 and be like, that's what I'm putting in my brain for my depression at this point. And look at a car now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's one of the things is like, it's incredible to be innovative in that space. And these facilities like Allendale that have implemented this are taking this evidence-based new treatment and implementing it in that context, also understanding the entire biopsychosocial history of the client. There's group therapy that goes on around the ketamine. There's individual therapy. People have some distance from their issues. So, ketamine saved me getting it in a outpatient clinical context, and 99.9% of the people that get ketamine get it in that context. And of course, I'm in favor of that. But when you think about it, 3 hours after your treatment, you're back on your couch where your problems exist.
Right.
That's tough. When you get it in an inpatient facility, you have the time to catch up on your sleep. I mean, a lot of the people that I treat are first responders, police officers from the biggest departments in the country, and their shifts make it impossible for them to sleep. And they're living constantly in fight or flight in their sympathetic nervous system, putting them into a facility where all of a sudden you're in this heightened state of neuroplasticity, and you have the time to optimize what you're doing within that state is incredible. It works much better. The durability seems to be much longer, and the experience for the patient is incredible.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would assume there's something about plucking you out of the environment that you came from and giving you space to be away from that, because I mean, it's very possible that some people that are doing outpatient ketamine are doing the ketamine treatment and then going right back into the same environment to where their traumas are occurring and being continuously re-traumatized.
Almost every time.
Exactly.
Almost every time. Yeah. I mean, I think that 30-day window, or however long they're in an inpatient thing, to build what we were talking about, the daily practices and the habits of what you do, when you're going through ketamine treatment, to build these habits and hobbies that are going to that are great to build while you're in that facility. But the important part is that they translate, and you wire these activities so they become normal part of your day when you get to the difficult part, which is when you get back to your living room. Instead of that time being 3 hours, now we have 30 days. And when we talk about the daily practices, there's a couple simple ones that, I go over with every group that I talk to. And I talk to people about implementing these things that hasten neuroplasticity, whether with or without the ketamine. So taking advantage of neuroplasticity is something that you can do with ketamine treatments. It will speed it up and catalyze it, but it also is something that, I implore people to do. Things like deliberate cold exposure, breath work, gratitude journaling, prioritizing sleep, diet, exercise.
Going for a walk, and things that are typically, to a certain extent free, that aren't going to cost you anything to implement into your life, which I think are such simple fixes that sometimes people are like wary of them. They're like, I don't know, that sounds too good to be true. And it's like, no, it's really not too good to be true. Especially when you look at it, it's like this stack, right? Of you've got your 30-day inpatient stay, so you're away from your triggers, you're away from your substance of choice. That's rooted in science. Dopamine fasting, right? Which is the idea that you need a minimum of about 30 days to kind of reset your brain from your substance of choice to get to an equilibrium, right? You're not going to be fixed, but you'll be closer to the equilibrium 30 days later than you would be 2 days later, right? And then you inject into that, quite literally as well as figuratively, ketamine into the situation that increases neuroplasticity. So your brain is recalibrating, you're getting your pain pleasure balance back in line. And now you're learning these new things. What a powerful thing with so much synergy in it. I mean, it can be life-changing for people. And I think that's why at Allendale Behavioral Health and Allendale Treatment, and even at Fort Wayne Recovery, we saw the power of being able to implement this. And we see so many people, who are like yourself, who have that, what we call treatment-resistant depression, that just feels so hopeless. I mean, we were, for so long, getting people off drugs and alcohol. And the reason we pivoted to add some mental health services and eventually our own mental health inpatient unit was people would get sober for 4, 5, 6, 7 months. And then they'd be like, I still want to kill myself. And we're like, oh, okay. And, we would reach out to insurance companies and they'd say, they haven't used. They want to go back to inpatient to keep them safe. They got to go get high first. And it's like, dude, we don't want that, and then we did have some people who would leave and they did take their own lives because we were unable to assist them in certain ways. But this gives us the space to be able to bring those people back in. And it's like you conquer one thing, which is the substance use, and to have that release valve to be able to go back in and take care of your mental health with this new tool in our toolbox that gives so much hope and can help rewire the brain. It's just, it's something that's so cool. And I think we're all very glad. And there's a whole lot of different research coming out in the mental health space about different psychedelics and some of the promising things associated with them. So do you want to talk briefly about some of the other psychedelics and how that looks?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a really exciting future that we have ahead of ourselves because, again, there's been no innovation for 50 years. So where is this innovation going to come from? I mean, there's more people dying of diseases of despair at this point.
Deaths of despair are all-time high.
Yeah.
Which, for those of you who don't know, is suicides and drug overdoses, right?
Right. And there's no change. What do we have? So all of a sudden, we have this world of psychedelic medicines. The one that was closest that's been such a tragedy was MDMA for PTSD.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It works well in a clinical setting in a controlled environment. It works very well.
And I'll go through it. So 80% of the people, and most of them were veterans, which we know 22 veterans kill themselves every single day in this country. It is
horrendous.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And you have something that was 80%, somewhere around 80% effective a year out, that the people were no longer diagnosable for PTSD, and the FDA rejected it about 5 or 6 months ago. Now they're back at the FDA and they're reworking it. There's some technicalities as to why it was rejected, but it's so exciting. It's an absolute disaster for the people within the window that it didn't get approved until it eventually guaranteed will get approved because of the efficacy. But for right now, there are people suffering. So that's a big one on the horizon, which, is really important to veterans and really important to solve that veteran suicide issue. The next closest one is psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in mushrooms. That's in a phase 3 at the FDA. We might be 6 months out now for being able to use psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. I think 70 to 80% effective 6 months out for people, again, with treatment-resistant depression. These things sound, for some people, if they've never heard it, it can blow their mind and shock them. The most interesting thing that I've found about this issue of psychedelics is the two groups that are that have the loudest voice in terms of supporting psychedelics. One is the groups that you would think it's like the hippies in Cambridge and Berkeley, of course, that are like,
legalize it all.
Yeah, LSD for everyone.
Put it at the gas station. Let me buy it there.
Exactly.
But no.
the other biggest group is special operators coming back and in retirement. So the biggest supporter of MDMA and this other plant medicine called ibogaine there's two guys, Republican congressman from Texas, this guy Dan Crenshaw.
Yeah, the guy with the eye patch, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And either Marcus or Morgan Luttrell, they're two like famous
Marcus Luttrell, yeah, he's the guy from, was that Lone Survivor? That's the movie,
right?
Where they went in and his whole team was killed and he made it out. So
right, and his brother is a Republican representative from Texas.
Oh, sure.
And Dan Crenshaw is a former Navy SEAL. I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of Navy SEAls going through ketamine and these other plant medicines, but they are and also Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas.
Yeah.
His life mission now is to get ibogaine into the public to treat things like PTSD and addiction. So it's one issue in this country of like such divided politics. Absolutely. That you have hippies from Berkeley and Cambridge and former Navy SEALs coming together and holding up placards in front of the White House supporting the same issue. There's not a lot of issues that are like bringing us together in this country, but the mental health issue and the issue of addiction and substance abuse, it doesn't discriminate. Not by how much money you have, not by what race or religion you have, not by what kind of education you have. It's hurting everybody, every family in this country. And here's an issue we can all get behind. And just logically, there have been no innovations. The problem is getting worse and worse, with fentanyl and just the fact that there might be something going on in society that's making people less happy than they were. And here's something that works. There's so much data to prove it. And there's two totally different groups that you would never expect coming together, getting behind this thing and like saying, please give us something that works. Thank God ketamine, FDA approved in 1970, used so widely, like kind of was able to sneak in and be the first of these psychedelic medicines. And it is saving lives like unbelievably.
Is there a difference between the way that ketamine or psilocybin or MDMA work in the brain, or is it very similar?
There's similarities and there's differences. A lot of the similarities are like the turbocharged neuroplasticity. For the MDMA, for example, if we're talking about MDMA for PTSD, for specific memories in the way that we were talking about EMDR. So this is how the trial went, is you'd go in for, psychotherapeutic sessions and you'd isolate a trauma or a couple of traumas, and then they'd administer the MDMA and you'd be in a room with an MD and a PhD for what would be like a 6 to 8 hour psychotherapy session. But instead of, when you recall that memory, having the cortisol release and the negative response, the MDMA floods you with serotonin and dopamine. So it allows you to go back in, rework and recontextualize the memory. Kind of like what we were saying, is all of a sudden I can look at the memory from a different angle. I'm sitting here for 6 hours with the express purpose of discharging this one memory. So like the EMDR and like the dissociative aspect of the ketamine, your purpose is to take the the present moment trigger off of that memory.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that could be even more effective than the ketamine then.
You know,
Potentially.
for that PTSD, I think there's almost no doubt about it. There's, the wonderful thing about these things being studied and the billions of dollars going into it is, as we all know, like human chemistry and biology differ so much from person to person that there will be use for all of these things for very, very different people and different reasons. And that's great. You know, we have, I don't know how many hundreds of like psychotropic drugs that exist now, and people react different to all of them. Like, it's going to be a nice world when people have the option, or their doctors have the option to say, you know, and we have a FDA phase 3 that says people in this category respond very well to this, with this history, to say this is going to be a good option for you given your biopsychosocial history.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So it sounds like there's some really good things on the horizon that are cause for hope, right? For a lot of different people who are out there who are suffering, who are watching that. And then, you know, we'll talk in the second half of this a little bit about kind of like what it looks like, best practice, but also like what best practice doesn't look like with some of this stuff. Because I think there's been a lot of, with any innovation, there's always an explosion of people who, I don't want to say exploit it, but they want to use it in a certain way without some rules or regulations. And, you know, listen, you know, I'm not a huge regulation guy, but there are regulations for a reason. And some of them do have to be abided by, you know. So in that second half, we can talk a little bit about that. And then we'll talk a little bit about the documentary that you were a part of, which I think is really cool. People really enjoy listening to that.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear you talk about that a little bit. I want to hear you talk about just kind of the history of ketamine itself and how it became so popular. I've talked with Nicole a little bit about that, but I would like to talk a little bit more in depth with you about it. So
I think you hit on the most important thing is, in this world, there's hope.
Yes.
And so many people have no hope to know that there's something that's about to change, or there's something new that they never heard of that's available, gives people a reason to live.
Warren, let's just start talking about best practices. Ketamine in a controlled environment, at an outpatient setting, at an inpatient setting. What does that typically look like?
Okay, well, let's talk about the best practice you can possibly have, like at Allendale, where you have a multidisciplinary approach to a screening. So first and foremost, ketamine is not for everybody.
Right.
There are people that disqualify for it, you know, due to certain things like, you know, their mental health history, a history of psychosis, depending on the clinicians and the medical staff looking at their history of addiction. And, you know, there's certain people and certain patterns that just don't fit in with ketamine. So first and foremost, a multidisciplinary approach. We understand if they're good candidates medically and clinically. So that's what takes place at Allendale, and that's critical. I mean, it serves the patient properly too, because, you know, you don't want to give ketamine to people that are less likely to benefit from it, or certain people. It can exacerbate, you know, negative things, like people in a manic phase of bipolar disorder, people with a history of psychosis. They're not good candidates for ketamine. People with untreated high blood pressure, from a medical perspective, they're not good candidates. So clearly, you know, if you have somebody in an inpatient facility, you get a very good understanding of them. You know, ketamine is not going to be the first day that you walk in. You're going to understand their medical history and their bio and psychosocial history well, but you're also going to understand them within a week of seeing them. So, you know, that's the best practices. There are very safe ways to get it in a clinical setting. There's many safe ways to get it, but there's been within the explosion of psychedelics and ketamine, of course, there's going to be opportunists that are doing things the wrong way. So one of the examples is, you know, there was a company during the pandemic, they put a waiver on this Ryan Haight Act, which now allows you to prescribe controlled substances over telehealth.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So some of these telehealth companies, the biggest one was with amphetamines.
Yeah.
Adderall. Some of these companies became multi-billion-dollar companies, giving every college kid that wanted Adderall as quickly as they wanted it over a telehealth thing.
Psychostimulants are on the rise. And so actually there are psychostimulant related deaths, surprisingly enough. Well, not surprising if you know the data, but anyway, go on.
Yeah, of course. So the same thing happened in the ketamine space. There's a safe way to do at-home ketamine, but it has to be. So I built a telehealth company.
Yeah.
I built it with under the advisement of the head of the psychiatry department at the University of Toronto, this guy, Dr. Roger McIntyre, who is the world's expert on depression, ketamine, and esketamine. And he is not like a risk-prone guy. He's risk-averse. You know, he's the top in the world. And I said, can we do this safely? And he said yes, and gave us several parameters, one of which is every time people, you know, you would only send a dose or two at a time. And every time somebody was going to do their treatment, they did it under the supervision of a HIPAA compliant Zoom with a nurse. So, but of course, I did it the best possible way.
Yeah.
There are companies that said, this is a free pass for us to start sending controlled substances. And guess what? People are going to line up if you can just do a phone call and for $50 get controlled substances like Adderall and those kind of things. So
100%.
So there's bad players in the space, and that happens, and that gives the people that can benefit from it, you know, it taints the reputation of some of these things that are so beneficial and so critical for us now that, you know, that's one of the downsides of it.
Yep.
Another thing that we talked about is within the world of psychedelics is like taking these things not seriously. These are serious catalysts. Like because people think like, oh, psilocybin and microdosing, and, you know, I'm not feeling good, let me just go take a whole bunch of mushrooms. And because somebody's studying it at the FDA, it's going to cure my depression.
Right.
Well, guess what I see now is like 60-year-old housewives that, you know, sent their kids off to college. They're ready to enter their retirement and everything is going well. And they're like, let me go to Costa Rica and do a psilocybin retreat.
Right.
Guess what? I'm meeting them in an inpatient facility and they're in active psychosis after they've had a suicide attempt.
Yeah.
So
it's not anything to play with. It's not a joke.
Nothing to play with. And again, like the steps and the rigor of the FDA was something I was so against. And I'm like, you know, let people have their freedom until I'm like, have been on this side of it. And I want people to have their freedom and access to these things. But, you know, when you take something through a phase 3 trial, you understand the safety and efficacy. You understand the people that it might not do well for. So the fact that this thing is coming up through the system, I thought, you know, my thoughts on it have evolved so much. Yeah. But because of the safety issue and because of the downside of when people do these things incorrectly and that havoc it can wreak on their life, I'm okay with the fact that this takes a lot of data. It takes a lot of studying, random controlled trials across large populations to understand who it's going to work for and who should just not be a candidate. And I think that's critical as we enter this new paradigm.
I agree. And I think that, you know, as Americans, we approach everything from government to institutions with a healthy degree of skepticism. That's very warranted. However, I agree with you fully. There's a process in place for a reason. And we've seen when processes break down, a great example is the opioid epidemic. There was not processes properly done when it comes to OxyContin and Purdue Pharma and all those things. And we're still feeling the fallout from that today. So I think with medical marijuana too, in marijuana in general, right? Like it's had this whole idea, there really wasn't a whole lot of proper studies done. And everyone just decided marijuana is harmless. And so they start legalizing it right and left. And now, you know, driving under the influence deaths goes up, psychosis, hospitalizations are up, ER visits are up, poison control things are up, suicides are up in some of those areas because of the psychedelic effects and things not being regulated properly. So it is important that it goes through that process. You know, I'm a lot like you, Warren, for a long time in many ways. I always make this joke, and it might rub some people the wrong way, but it's what we do. I said, you know, I always say I was a libertarian until I became an adult, you know, and you start to see how when people are like, you know, oh, we don't need any regulations. It's like, ooh, have you ever met human beings? You know, like especially drug addicts, you know, we take everything way out of proportion. And that's why it is so important to find something reputable with good safety rails involved when you're looking into any kind of psychedelic treatment, whether it's ketamine, whether it's psilocybin, MDMA, medical marijuana, whatever it is, like, and you have to take control of your health and not just because somebody in a white lab coat is willing to write you a prescription to take home, especially if you're in recovery from substance use. That's one thing we always like to add as a disclaimer is like, you know, you see people that talk about like they saw Joe Rogan on the Joe Rogan podcast talk about how something's safe Joe Rogan's not in recovery. It's a broadcast, just like because on something you saw here, don't take our medical advice, go do the research yourself, find a medical professional who knows what they're talking about. And on our podcast, we would never tell you to do anything anyway, take anything off the record without the help of a doctor, but be careful about the things you do. And like you said, the providers that do their homework and are going to do a full assessment and look at, do you meet criteria? Sometimes when you're told no, it's for a very good reason. And I know that a lot of people want to engage in these things, but it's not a free for all. It's not a freebie to go out and just, like you said, eat a bunch of mushrooms and take a bunch of ketamine and think, well, I can have my cake and eat it too. Medical dosages of psilocybin and ketamine don't get you high. Same thing with MDMA, right? Like in medical marijuana, it creates space for you to be in a therapeutic mindset, a therapeutic state. I always tell people, like, if you get something prescribed to you as a prescription and you can't drive on it, it's probably too much for you to be walking around taking it at home without any kind of supervision, aside from what you talked about with this very strict telemedicine. I'm sure you guys are like, hey, we can't do this when you're on your way to the grocery store. Like, we're not going to drive for the next 4 hours after we do this treatment. So again, I just want to caution people, because some people are watching probably like, oh, they're saying you can go do whatever you want any way you want. That's not at all what we're saying. Like, Tommy and I have known many people that are in recovery who take this stuff way too far. They don't do it under the purview of a doctor or a medical provider, and they take it into their own hands, which is something that us addicts and alcoholics very much like to do. We think we know best, and we like to have our cake and eat it too. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a warning. Like, make sure you're doing your due diligence when you're looking into ketamine and MDMA and all these things. It can be a slippery slope for people.
Can I follow that up?
Oh, please do.
Say what I say to every group that I speak to. Do not ever buy any of these things on the street and think that you are going to get therapy out of it. First of all, the drug supply in this country, as we all know here, and most people know because it's affected them, is riddled with fentanyl. You do not know what you're getting. Second of all, these are very strategic doses in very particular settings under psychiatric care. These things can go haywire very easily if you do them incorrectly. This is the discussion of this is talking about moving this into the Western medical paradigm so you can get it with a doctor under these conditions. In no way are we talking about even contemplating doing this on your own. The results will almost invariably be negative. So please don't do that.
Yeah.
I did a lot of psilocybin and MDMA, and it was not therapeutic when I was doing it. So
far from it.
Definitely not our recommendation.
No, not at all. So, let's talk a little bit about the documentary that you were able to participate in. It sounds like it's something that people will really enjoy hearing about.
Yeah, so I was, in part of my journey, I was helping open up a clinic in Delray Beach in South Florida. And, most people know Lamar Odom, the basketball player, married to a Kardashian. Most people know the story that he overdosed in a brothel outside of Las Vegas. He had 12 strokes, 6 heart attacks, multiple organ failure, was in a coma, and he recovered. But what will not be surprising to the three of us here, but might be surprising to the rest of the world, is he was back in his addiction a couple of weeks later.
Yep.
Lamar had a lot of childhood trauma, had a lot of PTSD, anxiety, depression, and that's oftentimes what drives us back into self-medication. So even that scare was not enough for him to reevaluate things. So a friend of his reached out to me and my partner and asked if we could help Lamar go through ketamine treatments. And of course we said, yes. And we asked Lamar, would you mind if we film it? Because at that time, this is like 7 or 8 years ago, I still spend all of my days talking about, what ketamine is, why it works, what it doesn't work for, all of this stuff. But, there was no knowledge of it at all in this context. So it was going to be so helpful to have, somebody like Lamar going through it. And we had the top ketamine doctors in the country talking about what ketamine is and why it works. And, Lamar ended up, filming it. He had such a huge breakthrough. This was right on the end of that overdose and things like that. He had such a huge breakthrough that he wanted to, of course, continue with the ketamine treatments. And then his mind was opened up into other daily practices like holotropic breathing. And then he wanted to move further into some of the plant medicines. So we brought him down to Mexico to do a very powerful plant medicine. They call it the grandfather of psychedelics, called ibogaine. And, that they call it the journey of ibogaine is like climbing Mount Everest. It's unpleasant. This is not like, roses and flowers and beautiful colors. This is a, deep introspective journey through your life. It's a sacrament of the Bwiti tribe in Central Africa and Gabon. And they take that, as their entrance into adulthood. And they say you take it until you access a male ancestor or until you die, because it can be cardiotoxic. So when you go and do it in Mexico, you're doing it under medical supervision, hooked up to an EKG. It can be dangerous. But so anyways, Lamar wanted to go through it, and we made a documentary called Lamar Odom Reborn, and you can watch it for free on YouTube. But you watch Lamar go through the ketamine, so you get an idea of that thing, and then move into some of these other daily practices, and then eventually ibogaine, which is another fascinating plant medicine. That's the one that so many Navy SEALs and special operators, once they come out of service, they're going to Mexico to deal with their TBI and PTSD. And it works really well, again, for substance use issues. I'd say half of the people that go to do ibogaine go for fentanyl addiction and cocaine addiction and amphetamine addiction. And the other half are, veterans and special operators.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, that sounds like it was very cool to be a part of something like that.
It was awesome. Lamar is the nicest guy in the world. He's so lovable. One thing about Lamar is, he grew up in Queens at 10 years old. Everyone knew what he was going to be. He was 6'1".
He's pretty big, huh?
He's humongous, but they know he's going to be a professional basketball player. So he was like, first of all, he lost his mother when he was 10 years old. So his grandmother raised him. And he was like coddled by his whole structure, his whole ecosystem. Yeah. So he didn't learn how to do basic things like book flights and do your taxes. Like, he didn't have those skills, which is understandable. It's not because he's not smart enough to do it. He's a genius. Yeah. He's super smart, works super hard. Like anybody that's won an NBA championship and a gold medal has a work ethic and intelligence. He just, didn't have some of those skill sets. So it was amazing to get to know Lamar. I think it was like one of the peak experiences of my life to watch somebody like that who was really on the floor. And it was somebody that everybody not only like knew him because they've seen him in headlines, but because he was part of the Kardashians, which is a whole nother thing. Yeah. They felt like they knew who he was. Yeah. Right. Like they've been in the living room with him. So being able to watch that documentary and be a fly on the wall of somebody like that's transformation, I participated and made it for the hopes that it would allow people to open the door, to open their mind, to look at some of these things because they knew Lamar. And I hope that it's had that impact, is that people have been able to see some of these things that are controversial, for a good reason. Like we talked about, when used the wrong way, they can be bad for people, but we need them. We don't have anything else. So, if part of it and part of this is to open some people's mind that might instantly have a negative reaction the second you say the word ketamine or the second you say the word psychedelic, to give them a 1 second of space to take in some information before they jump to a conclusion or to an opinion, then that was the purpose of that documentary. And I hope it's some of the purpose of this, is to just say, take a minute, just look with an open mind. If at the end of it, you want to hold on to that position, I'm okay with it. Yeah. I'm okay with disagreement, but take a minute, understand where we are in society, what our options are, what's harming our families and our veterans and the people, and like what options do we have at this moment?
No, I agree. And I think that, there's people on both sides of the fence. There's the people that don't agree with it because they don't know what it's about. They think it's just more legal drug dealing. And then there's people on the other side that we talked about too, who are so in favor of it. They're in favor of no control. So, the point of this is to bring people in and say, hey, look, this can be a really good thing for those people who think it's all bad, but then it can be a good thing for those people who think it's all good under controlled settings. And there's a right way to do it. That creates the space for people to heal. And I think Lamar Odom is such a great story because of his public rise and then public fall. And, who doesn't love redemption after something like that? Like the climbing the mountaintop and being an NBA champion and a professional athlete and, seemingly doing what everybody thinks is like this dream of life, which is to achieve this fame and this fortune and marry a Kardashian, all these things, right? And then to see that person still be so unhappy and completely ruin their lives and almost die, and then go right back to doing the same thing that almost killed them. And then to see them climb out of this hole when they're doing things the wrong way, and then start doing things the right way, and then take these chances and put in the work. I just think it's so cool, and hopefully that gives people an idea that no matter what they're going through, no matter what highs they've had or the lows that they've had, they can make it out. There's a pathway for them. And like you said, it looks different for everybody, but man, what a cool thing to provide hope for people.
I think you're right. And, one of the cool inspiring parts of Lamar, like for people that feel bad about themselves that are going through these things, is imagine being Lamar. Like you can be Tom Cruise, but you can wear a disguise and go into McDonald's if you don't have any money. Imagine being Lamar down and out. You're 7 feet tall. You leave your house, everyone knows you. The Kardashian fans, the NBA fans, and you're rock bottom and you're Lamar Odom. There's no hiding out.
No.
And like, as bad as we feel, like, sometimes the people that we'll meet in the first week of being in an inpatient facility feel bad about some of the mistakes that they made and feel embarrassed and all of these things. Imagine a guy like Lamar that had $200 million, the NBA championship, all of these things. And now, has no money.
Yeah.
He's feeling terrible. He cannot walk outside without every single person that sees him jumping on top of him to ask him positive questions, negative questions. For a guy like that to pull through, I think it's inspiring for anybody that's feeling bad about themselves. Is like, all right, this guy got it back together with all of this scrutiny. And it's like, it is inspiring. It was inspiring to me to see him like focus in on it and do the work that needed to be done.
Yeah, it's inspiring for people that may be struggling, but I think it also inspires kind of a forgotten group of people, which is the families of people who are struggling. And, they oftentimes feel a deep amount of despair, and they'll always say like, is it ever going to get better? And it's like, I can't tell you that everything's going to be okay because I don't know that, but there's still a chance. As long as they're breathing, there's a chance they can turn it around. And I think the hope that it provides those people too is also so beautiful, just because I can't imagine what it's like having somebody like a child that you love with all your heart, that's a part of you, like you created that person, and watching them struggle that badly. So I think whether you knew it or not coming on here, but you're providing those people a lot of hope too. There's a lot of families that cry themselves to sleep at night, wondering about their kid or their spouse, whoever it is, their loved one that they would do anything for to take it all away, but they just can't. And to hear that they can maybe at some point get this treatment for depression that just won't go away, that just haunts them like this dark cloud that follows them everywhere. And we talk a lot about if people don't get a deal with their pain, they just transfer it to everybody else. And so some people have these individuals in their lives, and it's not because they do it on purpose. It's just because they've had something tragic happen to them, or they're born with some kind of dopamine deficiency or neural pathway somewhere went haywire for whatever reason, and they're really in this dark place.
So I have a question, Warren. From the time that you first started your ketamine treatment, what you said 10 years ago, roughly, from the time you first started feeling the really positive benefits from it, what did that look like? Like, how did that turn into you becoming the advocate that you are for it now? Like, what did that look like in the beginning?
So, I was basically, before I found the ketamine, I was stuck in bed for a couple of years. I was like, I could maybe get myself to the bar with a drink and whatever substance I needed to get up and move. But, besides that, I had nothing really going on in my life. And I like to be like impassioned by a project and something that I'm interested in. So when I got the ketamine and my depression like went away after 3 years of going to doctors and switching all my meds, I'm like, I almost killed myself. Like, and it was so hard to find this. I'm like, this is what I'm doing. I'm like, I'm going to make sure that people know this exists. So it was like instantaneous. There's like this Mark Twain quote, that says the two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you understand why. And it, like, when I saw that quote, it made total sense to me. I'm like, this is what I'm meant to do. Like, it was the first time I felt like I had a mission that was really important, because like it was so close for me. And like I felt like the louder I could scream it, the more people would hear it. And maybe people in that position, would find it easier, because it was hard to find back then.
Yeah.
So from there, I just started traveling around the country to the few doctors that were doing it. By the way, there were a dozen ketamine clinics in the country when I started. There's over 2,000 now.
Wow.
So it's, at that point, it was this tiny thing with such a powerful, tool to fight what I was dealing with specifically. So I started traveling around, helping those doctors kind of synthesize best practices, like what was working for them, and helping, kind of share that information. And then it's just like, just walking through life, the opportunities like, meeting Lamar happened. It became really obvious to start the Ketamine Fund, which was a 501c3 for veterans, because so many people were calling me saying, I need this treatment, or my husband needs this treatment. He had a suicide attempt, but we can't afford it. And that's a big part of it is, ketamine can be expensive. It's not covered by insurance. So that led me on the Ketamine Fund journey, which is like, all right, let's try to raise some money. So if a vet calls me, I can say, all right, you can go to this clinic in Chicago or in St. Louis or Omaha, and, I'll call the clinic and we'll take care of the, as long as you get approved for treatment, we'll take care of the costs. And then it's just been just a natural evolution of learning more. And then the evolution of saying, oh man, this is going to be important in an inpatient context. And again, that's been then starting the telehealth company, because the pandemic hit and people couldn't get their ketamine. So that's what drove it, is like the clinics are closed down. People are going to kill themselves. It's already a high stress mental health disaster, cataclysm. So like, let's not take the ketamine away from the people that it's working for. So that just like naturally, occurred. And then I had the opportunity to start an implementation at an inpatient. I'm like, this is it. These people need it the most. Like, it works really well in this controlled environment to make sure the right people are getting it, to make sure they're doing the right thing when they get it. So it's just all been like, putting one foot in front of the other, and just when I see things that make sense, like following those, like, those breadcrumbs of life, which I believe in, like, you
absolutely.
just get like a trail and you're like, obviously I should do this. And I just do that.
When you first started traveling around to meet with those dozen or so doctors, was it easy to get in front of them and sit down with them and talk to them back then? Were they really excited to be able to share their information and knowledge with you?
Yeah. And I think they knew my intention, which was like, okay, the doctor that treated me is an 80-year-old anesthesiologist. And like, and I'm like, at that point, a 35-year-old alcoholic, like, there's a language barrier in terms of like saying like, what does ketamine feel like? And him being like, well, you might feel a little bit dizzy. He's the best guy in the world. I'm not trying to like mimic him, but like, then instead somebody like me calling his office and getting on the phone with somebody like me that's been through it, that's like, this is what it's going to be like, I understand you're depressed and I understand that feeling. I know that feeling. And the same when I'm talking to groups at Allendale, is like, I know exactly what they're feeling, not precisely each individual, but in general, I know what it feels like to be addicted and depressed. And like, to hear this information instead of from another person in a white coat is like to hear from somebody that, has taken the time to understand the various aspects of it, but has also been in that position. I think they were really happy to have somebody that was willing to dedicate, because I wasn't getting paid to do it, to dedicate their time as like an advocate and a liaison between the patients and them.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. Sounds like it's been quite the journey to, from where you were to where you are. And, Dr. Alfred Adler, he's famous, talks a lot about curing depression through bringing joy to the life of others, which I think is a huge part of it. But, as many people point out, that can be fantastic, but sometimes there's still chemical things that hold us back and we have no control over. And so it's so cool that this is something that can help with that chemical side and then allow you to make those life changes to then engage in that joyful, purposeful life of helping other people find their joy and their purpose. So I think that's really cool.
Well, we are about out of time. So Warren, do you have any closing thoughts or anything you'd like to share before we run out?
just thankful that you guys are doing this. I'm thankful that, you guys have given me the opportunity to implement this at Allendale and to come here and share it with your audience. And I hope, if one person hears it, then, I've done my job. I think we've all done our job, and I'll be proud of, what I've done today. And that's all I can ask for out of my life. So thank you guys.
We appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us, Warren. And thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.